Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for watching our Texas Normal live stream today. We are going to be chatting with Morgan Fox, the political director with Normal. It's great to have you here today, Morgan. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about a couple important things going on at the federal level. We're going to talk about scheduling, and we're also going to talk about the banking bill. So let's talk about scheduling first, Morgan, and to kind of set the stage for people. Scheduling has to do with the Controlled Substance Act, or the CSA, and which level the drugs are scheduled at. Marijuana or cannabis is scheduled at Schedule 1, which technically means that it has no medical efficacy or uses, which of course we know is not the case. And right now there is some conversation being had at the federal level about changing the schedule that cannabis is at. So can you tell us a little bit about what is the status, Morgan?
Well, in October of last year, the Biden administration, in addition to announcing blanket pardons for anybody with simple possession charges at the federal level, which are still in motion, also called on the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Justice to conduct a scheduling review of cannabis, which Normal has actually sued for on multiple occasions and gotten, unfortunately, not great results and a lot of pushback from the federal government. But this administration seems to be much more interested in actually moving forward with it. Very recently, the head of Health and Human Services, Chairman Becerra, said that we are looking at potential results from that scheduling review by the end of the year. What those results will be is anybody's guess. Thus far, all the scheduling reviews that we've seen have not resulted in anything other than maintaining cannabis in a Schedule 1 status. But, I think that with the support of the administration and with a lot more scientific information, as well as, I should pull back. There was plenty of scientific information not to put cannabis in Schedule 1, but a lot of this is political. But there is a lot of political momentum to remove cannabis from Schedule 1. The problem is that anything other than completely removing cannabis from the schedule entirely is not going to remove the conflict between state cannabis laws and federal prohibition. Not to mention the fact that when we're looking at the scheduling scenario here, the simple fact is that cannabis does not belong on any of these schedules. And if we move it to a different schedule, like Schedule 2, Schedule 3, Schedule 4, Schedule 5, that's not really going to change the status of any of the state laws. And it's not really going to help us at the federal level really whatsoever. It will be mostly symbolic. I'm concerned that even if HHS recommends that we move cannabis to Schedule 3 or below, that we also have to worry about the fact that at the end of the day, the DEA administration has the final word on this, and Normal has conducted multiple lawsuits over the last 40 some years to change this, and at every step, once it comes to the DEA, we have gotten pushback from this, and they've shut it down. So. I'm a little bit worried that we are, not going to get a recommendation from HHS or FDA in terms of the appropriate way to treat cannabis, which is to remove it from the schedule entirely. But also, even if they do suggest that we move it to a lower schedule or to deschedule it entirely, the other institutions and agencies that are responsible for controlling this are just going to drag their feet on it.
Yeah, so just a little bit of vocab here for some people who might be a little bit confused about what is rescheduling versus descheduling. So we talked about, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different schedules in the CSA. Cannabis is right now at the most harmful, right? It's the worst at number 1. And rescheduling would mean moving it down to a lower schedule. Descheduling would mean removing it off of the Controlled Substance Act altogether, kind of like how hemp products were fully descheduled a few years back. So it sounds like from what you're saying is that Normal's official policy is that we would support descheduling over rescheduling. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Cannabis does not belong on the schedule of controlled substances. Just in the same way that alcohol is not on the schedule of controlled substances. It's a substance that needs some form of regulation at the federal level, but by putting it on that schedule, you are not doing anything to eliminate the conflict between current state laws that allow for either medical or adult use of cannabis and what federal policy is. There are some things that might be accomplished by moving it down to Schedule 3 or below, such as removing the threat of 280E or potentially lessening some of the issues involving banking. But it would really not do what I think a lot of people are currently saying that it would do. And the bottom line is that we don't have any sort of historical evidence to suggest that any of the agencies involved are going to suggest moving it to a lower schedule, even with the support of the current presidential administration. And regardless of that support, we're coming up on an election year. Any agency head that is directed to do this could very well drag their feet until after the election and then decide what they want to do with it. This is something that these agencies have been predicated upon. There's a significant amount of their budgets built around cannabis prohibition, and by changing that, they have to deal with a lot more headaches than they would by simply keeping it at Schedule 1, regardless of the political ramifications, which, as I said, very well might change in the next year and a half.
So it sounds like the current timeline is that hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have an official report. And then at that point, it goes through the process with the departments, which we know can be pretty slow and cumbersome, right?
Absolutely. DEA has the final say in this process. And, as of right now, we have not gotten any sort of inclination from the current head of the DEA that this is something that they're particularly interested in. Not to mention the fact that FDA will then have to develop a process if it's in a schedule at all. Any schedule below Schedule 1 means that the FDA has to develop a process by which to review cannabis and cannabinoid drugs, and thus far they have never given a carte blanche approval for a plant-based drug. Especially considering that different phenotypes involved in cannabis are something that is really not able to be locked down in a very, very specific scientific format. So,
be interesting the impact that it would have if it's just rescheduled, as to like how pharmaceutical companies would be able to interact with cannabis and what that would do with a lot of these state-run programs.
Exactly. If the FDA were not to develop a specific pathway for cannabis and cannabinoid drugs that recognizes the fact that there is a wide variety of different strains and different phenotypes of this substance, if they were to run it through the normal processes, then only people that could afford to drop $3, $4, $5 million on an FDA drug approval process would actually get that. Not to mention the fact that if cannabis is rescheduled to 3, then we're still looking at complete non-compliance of every single state medical cannabis program, and that would mean that we would have to wait years for cannabis to actually go through the FDA process. And if states wanted to get into compliance with that, it would take probably a decade. And we are looking for compliance, and the only way to get that is if we deschedule cannabis.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for the update on that. Let's talk about the banking bill. So I know that this is something you have been working on through its many iterations over the years. Can you give a little bit of a format for us of, what does it do at this point in time and what does it not do?
Well, I mean, just as a little bit of a backup or like a background, um, you know, this legislation has been approved in the House 7 times already in one form or another. It has never been approved in the Senate. It has never even received a real serious hearing. Uh, there have been, informational hearings about it, and we are very happy to see that it got one of those informational hearings a couple of months ago. But we have yet to receive a markup, which means that the bill is actually being considered for a vote, and that lawmakers are looking at things to potentially add or take away from it. As of last year, when there was a lot of interest in making sure this legislation went through in one form or another, but not a lot of political will to make it happen. There have been a number of agreements made, and I think that right now we are in a position where those agreements may come to fruition. Um, Everything that I'm hearing right now is saying that we are looking at a potential markup in the Senate Banking Committee over the next couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that process is going to mean that there will be a lot of things flung at the wall in terms of additions or subtractions to it. But I am cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to bring that through the Senate Banking Committee to a vote in that committee, and then eventually bring it to a floor vote. Especially if it includes things like funding for state level expungement. Um, right now, some of the new additions that we've seen from last year's version are really excellent, like specific protections for MDIs and CDFIs, which are minority depository institutions and community development institutional funds, and we're able to get protections for people that work in the cannabis industry to be able to get home loans. These are very, very important things that we were able to get added to this legislation. And once it gets out of committee, we are very, very hopeful that we'll be able to connect things like expunging or providing funding for state level expungements where the vast majority of cannabis arrests have occurred, as well as Second Amendment protections. But right now, we just have to wait and see what the schedule looks like. This is something that has been problematic for us over the last couple of years, but especially right now, just getting time on the schedule to deal with cannabis issues, because there are so many other political issues going on. And, even, in the House side, right now we're primarily focused on the Senate, but on the House side, most of the committees are involved in various investigations or, various other political issues that are not really dealing directly with legislation that is key to passing good law when it comes to cannabis. And so, this is going to be problematic. And, this is one of those things that that keeps coming back to bite us in the butt over and over and over again, is that we get a lot of support, we get a lot of backing, but when it comes down to it, cannabis is a low priority issue for most lawmakers, and that is primarily because they are not hearing from their constituents enough that it is a high priority issue.
Well, so what kind of support does the banking bill have right now? So it sounds like it's passed the House, right? And so in the Senate committee that it's facing, how do you feel it would pass or not pass? Are there any people that might be standing in the way of it in that committee?
Well, I mean, I should point out that it hasn't even been reintroduced in the House at this point. Um, it will not be until the Senate deals with it. The strategy in the House is to let the Senate deal with it, because it was on the verge of being dealt with at the end of last year and then fell victim to party politics. So right now, everybody's waiting on the Senate.
Okay, so the Senate is going to do their work first, and then it's going to come to the House for them to vote on it for like the 9th time or whatever it is.
Well, technically, it would be the 8th time, but yes.
8th time. Okay.
It's really unfortunate that we have this sort of like this bicameral struggle where we have a lot of support in the Senate, a significant amount of support. primarily among Democrats, but also I feel like if it were to be called for a vote on the floor right now, as written, it would be able to pass in the Senate. But there are a lot of other political issues involved. Even on the Democratic side, um, there are concerns about uh, you know the language providing too much coverage for banks outside of cannabis issues. There's a general desire across the board to have more protections for um, you know minority cannabis operators, and these are things that we absolutely should include. But when it comes down to it, how many Republican votes are we going to lose by including too much? And how many Democratic votes are we going to lose by keeping some of the language that's currently in it? Um, at the end of the day, though, the language that is on the floor right now has been the result of a lot of bipartisan negotiation and could feasibly pass were it brought to the floor today.
Okay,
And
so it sounds like the support is generally there. What the real problem is the timing on people's agendas, that there's so much other political and legislative action going on that they're having to deal with, that it's just kind of, when can we fit in to get in?
yeah, and in the immediate future, uh, what we really need to worry about is getting a markup in the Senate Banking Committee.
Okay.
And Chairman Brown from Ohio is a supporter, uh, but he wants it to go a lot farther than it does, which understandable. I do too, but we have to look at political pragmatism.
Mhm. So it sounds like there's probably an action alert related to both the banking and maybe the descheduling that people could participate in on normal.org/act. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
And I think that even above these, I definitely want everybody to contact their lawmakers about safe banking, because I think that this is an incremental step that will help us be able to push the ball forward on a lot of other things that obviously safe banking affects consumers uh, very, very much so. I mean, just from a personal perspective, my own father is a medical cannabis patient, and he refuses to go into any of the dispensaries because he's worried about getting robbed uh,
Mm,
because of the rash of robberies that have happened in Washington State. Um, and I think that this is something that we really have to look at in terms of immediate good, and then build upon that. The history of cannabis policy reform has been incremental, and holding up a dollar on a dime is not the way for us to move forward. And if we cannot get something passed through this Congress, we might be waiting years before we can even pass incremental legislation.
don't you put that out into the universe there.
I don't want to do that, but we have to maintain momentum, and the only
Yeah.
way to do that is by passing incremental legislation. And this is one that has all eyes on it. It's something that is has bipartisan support. It's something that has support from a lot of different stakeholders outside of just the cannabis world. And so, if we can get this passed, then we have a platform upon which to build with individual lawmakers, as well as state regulators and a lot of other stakeholders involved in this space, where we can actually start thinking about what the next step is. But if we don't
Mhm.
take that first step, then where are we at?
Right.
We might be, the results of the next election might put us in an even worse position.
I understand what you're saying, and I don't like that. But it sounds like there's definitely some action alerts that people can participate in, and hopefully some other things are going to be happening at the federal level. Are there any other things that you want to highlight before we wrap up here, Morgan?
Absolutely. There is a significant amount of legislation being added as amendments to must pass spending bills related to things like veterans access, and protecting states from federal interference for adult use. Language protecting states from interference based on medical programs has been baked into the federal budget since 2014, but we have never gotten that extra nut to add to adult use. And there's a very real possibility that we might be able to get that as well. In addition, we're looking at a lot of standalone legislation coming up. I mean, there's already just a slew of different veterans-related bills that would not only protect veterans from persecution for their medical cannabis use, but would also allow VA doctors to be able to recommend medical cannabis within the confines of the VA system, which would certainly help veterans quite a bit. There are a number of research bills already in play. And in the very near future, I am expecting to see the introduction of bills that would not only protect federal employees from discrimination for their past or current cannabis use, but also make sure that people would not be denied security clearances. And while I don't have a timeline for it yet, I am very, very hopeful that we will see introduction of legislation that would prevent people from being discriminated against for their lawful cannabis use, either medical or adult, when it comes to federal housing, which is
Mm.
something that I'm sure you've heard about so many times. I mean, I get calls from people every single day saying that they're on the verge of getting kicked out of their federally funded housing because they're a medical patient. And these are the little incremental measures that we can take that directly impact consumers that are oftentimes get lost in the coverage of this issue, but that are vitally important to cannabis consumers.
Sorry, we had a little dip in the internet there, and I think I lost you for a second.
Oh no.
But I did hear you saying that there are quite a few things happening, some incremental changes to help keep our momentum going. You were talking about some veteran bills, some things that are coming up on the horizon. And so I just want to close with letting everybody know that you can go to normal.org/act. And at the top there are going to be all of the federal action alerts that you can participate in and definitely help push some of this policy at the federal level while we wait for our next legislative session here in Texas. So I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today, Morgan.
Thank you very much for having me. And I just want everybody to remember that legalization is just the first step. Cannabis consumers continue to be discriminated against in a wide variety of ways, even in a post legalization world. So it's really important to keep up the fight.
Absolutely, we agree. And thank you for doing the work up in DC for us. And until next time, my friend, I will bid you adieu.
Thanks for
Bye.
having me. Thanks for all the work you do in Texas.
Thank you. Bye, Morgan.